Grace and peace. My name's Ryan, and I'm about thinking theologically when I go to the movie theater. I was excited. I got this movie pass that lets me see movies, but I got it after Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was already out of theaters. I didn't make it to see it in theaters. I wanted to, and then it came back because it's award season, so I got to see it, and I didn't understand it. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was fun, but I was confused most of the movie. I didn't see how one plot had to do with another. And then I did what you do when you don't understand a text, right? What do you do when you're reading the Bible? You don't understand it. You go online, you look at some commentaries, you see what other people had to say. Maybe they have an interpretation that can help you understand it. And it turns out that before I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I was supposed to be familiar with the events of the 1960s, and in particular, the Manson family and their victim, Sharon someone. I didn't know that. I wasn't around in the 1960s. It was new information for me. But that was such an interesting thought to have after seeing a movie, especially since there was so much else that was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood that I did understand that I don't think a lot of people would have. In order to really understand Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Quentin Tarantino asks a lot of his viewers. It's a hard watch. We talk a lot about hard reads, like, what's your grade level, what's the challenge level of this particular book, but we don't always appreciate that there is such a thing as a hard movie to watch that expects you to kind of be mature and know a bunch of stuff. For one thing, in order to fully understand Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you need to be pretty familiar with Quentin Tarantino's past movies. He makes a lot of references to his past movies, and some of the things that go on rely upon events of previous movies. This is a part of his realer-than-real universe, so it's in some ways a sequel to Inglourious Basterds, although it follows a totally different plot and characters. It takes place in a world where Hitler was killed in a movie theater, and some of the events that the main character in this film, some of the films he was in, his past films, were depicting events of Inglourious Basterds, and all of that stuff was going on. Now, luckily, I have seen all of Tarantino's previous movies, and so I was reasonably able to keep up with that stuff. But that's not enough. You have to be familiar with the kinds of movies Quentin Tarantino really likes. So he was making a bunch of references to Westerns, and he was making a bunch of references to Steve McQueen and Bullitt and that era of classic cinema, more so than any of his previous movies, because this movie took place in Hollywood. Well, I mean, that's a pretty high level of challenge, but again, I'm the movie pastor. I'm interested in old movies. I remember growing up, I used to watch old movies with my dad, and so I was able to keep up with most of those. And then he's got this another layer to it. And I should mention, you have to be familiar with the movies both on screen and off screen, right? Both the behind the camera, who are the actors, the directors behind things, and the stuff that went on the camera. We've got a joke about something that happened in Great Escape, for instance. Well, then all of that on top of information about the Manson family, where they never really say the word Manson, but you would pick it up if you were familiar with it. And as I was engaging with this idea, this concept of expecting a lot of your viewers, this concept of making references to so many things, it all reminded me of the book of Revelation. Is it possible that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is Quentin Tarantino's Revelation? Revelation is a hard read. It's a challenging, or even, I would argue, it's more like a play than a book. It says in the book that it's supposed to be read. Blessed is anyone who hears the words of this book. And so it's audio. But what Revelation just expects a whole bunch of its readers. It makes 505 references to the Old Testament, and it's got fewer verses than that total. It gives references to the time and place in history where it was taking place, these 7 churches in Asia and things they're dealing with. And so you're supposed to know that when we're talking about archers on horseback, we're obviously talking about the Parthians. And if you live in 21st century in the United States, you might never have heard the word Parthenians before. And so it's just challenging. And it leads a bunch of people to make up other interpretations, often problematic ones. If you've ever heard someone say that they can explain to you all the prophecies in Revelations, you know that they don't know the first thing about the book of Revelation. Literally, the first thing about it is its title. And it's not a book full of revelations. It's a revelation. It's a revealing of Jesus Christ. And so there's all of this familiarity that is expected of the audience of the Old Testament, all of this familiarity that's expected of the audience of the gospel. It's written to Christians, it's written to people who are experiencing persecution, and all of this familiarity that's expected of that context, not the modern 21st century context where we can connect things that are in the book that seem strange with things that we saw last week on CNN, but rather that place there. And for many of us, that's uncomfortable. We expect the Bible to be different from that. We expect it to be God's word straight to us, and therefore immediately inspirational without having to do a lot of hard work. And I think films like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood help us to challenge that assumption, can show us that something can be really good. It can be a great piece of art, and it can still rely on a lot of background knowledge and even be subject to easy misinterpretation. I'd be interested to hear what you think. Am I off base about this Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as Revelation thing? I mean, Tarantino said he's going to make another movie, so what's he do for an encore? If this is the most referential one, I'm not sure. You should give me some comments. You should also give me some likes and some subscribes, because that's how we get this message out, and that's how we get more people who think they're talking about Tarantino end up talking about Revelation, and we all learn together about both of those things. Wouldn't that be cool? I think it would, and I'll see you next time.
And when in scenes of glory I sing the new song, 'twill be the old story that I